The stadium was alive with an energy that could only be described as electric. 70,000 voices merged into one deafening roar as the lights dimmed and the opening chord reverberated through the massive arena. This was the night everyone had been waiting for, Michael Rivera's homecoming concert in Chicago, the city where his journey had begun 20 years ago in a cramped basement with nothing but a second-hand guitar and impossible dreams. Michael stood backstage, his heart pounding in rhythm with a bass that shook the concrete beneath his feet. At 4-2, he had conquered the music world with a string of platinum albums and sold-out tours across 6 continents. His face adorned magazine covers, his songs played in every corner of the globe, yet tonight felt different. Tonight, he was home, standing on the precipice of what his team had dubbed the performance of his career. The pressure was immense, but Michael thrived under pressure. It was what had transformed him from a struggling artist sleeping in his car to one of the most influential musicians of his generation. His manager, Patricia, appeared beside him with a tablet glowing in the darkness. She rattled off last-minute details about the set list, the pyrotechnics, the precisely choreographed moments that would wow the audience. Michael nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, drifting back to the streets of his childhood, to the mother who had worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, to the music teacher who saw something in him when everyone else saw just another kid from the wrong side of town. Tonight was for them as much as it was for the fans who had lifted him to these dizzying heights. The countdown began. 10 seconds. Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the familiar pre-show ritual calm his nerves. He touched the silver bracelet on his wrist, a gift from his late mother, and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. 5 seconds. The roar of the crowd grew impossibly louder. They were chanting his name, a thunderous chorus that made the walls vibrate. 3 seconds. Michael opened his eyes, a smile breaking across his face. 2 seconds. He stepped toward the stage entrance, his band already in position, instruments ready. 1. The explosion of light and sound was overwhelming. Michael burst onto the stage with the energy of someone half his age, his voice strong and clear as he launched into his biggest hit. The crowd went absolutely wild, a sea of raised arms and glowing phone screens stretching as far as the eye could see. Every person in that stadium had their own story about how Michael's music had touched their lives. The breakup song that helped them heal, the anthem that gave them courage, the ballad they played at their wedding. Tonight, all those individual stories merged into one collective experience of pure joy. Michael moved across the stage with practiced grace, hitting every mark perfectly. The massive LED screens behind him displayed stunning visuals synchronized to each song. Dancers emerged from hidden platforms, their movements sharp and precise. Flames shot up from the stage edges on cue, adding drama to an already spectacular show. Michael fed off the crowd's energy, his performance elevating with every verse. This was what he lived for, not the awards or the wealth, but these moments of connection where music became a bridge between his soul and thousands of others. As the 3rd song ended, Michael paused to address his audience. His voice boomed through the speakers, intimate yet powerful. He spoke about coming home, about the streets that raised him, about dreams that seemed impossible until they weren't. The crowd listened in rapt attention, hanging on every word. Some wiped away tears. Others held their friends closer. Michael had a gift for making 70,000 people feel like he was speaking directly to each one of them individually. It was this authenticity, this genuine connection, that had made him more than just a pop star. He was a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt forgotten. The concert continued with one hit after another. Michael's stamina seemed endless as he danced, sang, and commanded the stage with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. His voice never wavered, hitting the high notes that defined his signature sound with crystal clarity. The band behind him was tight, their chemistry the product of years touring together. They weren't just musicians playing notes. They were storytellers using instruments to create emotional landscapes that complemented Michael's vocals perfectly. By the time the 8th song rolled around, Michael was drenched in sweat but showing no signs of slowing down. The production crew backstage monitored everything from lighting to sound levels, ensuring every technical aspect was flawless. Patricia watched from the wings, a satisfied smile on her face. Everything was going according to plan. The reviews tomorrow would be glowing. The social media buzz was already trending worldwide. This concert would be remembered as one of Michael's finest performances, a triumphant return to his roots that exceeded even the highest expectations. Nothing could possibly go wrong with a show this perfectly executed, this meticulously planned. At least, that's what everyone believed as Michael launched into the ninth song, completely unaware that within minutes, everything was about to change in ways nobody could have predicted. Michael was halfway through Unbreakable, the power ballad that had defined his career and become an anthem for resilience worldwide. His voice soared over the instrumental bridge, and the audience swayed in unison, thousands of lighters and phone flashlights creating a constellation of lights in the darkness. It was a breathtaking sight, the kind that reminded Michael why he endured the grueling tour schedules and constant pressure. These moments made everything worthwhile. He was so lost in the performance, so connected to every word he sang, that he almost didn't notice a disturbance in the front section. Almost. Years of performing had given Michael an uncanny awareness of his audience. He could sense mood shifts, spot someone in distress, feel when something wasn't quite right. As he moved across the stage, his eyes scanned the crowd in front of him, and that's when he saw it, a commotion in the barrier separating the front row from the stage. Security guards were pushing through the densely packed crowd, their urgent movements cutting through the sea of dancing bodies. Michael's voice remained steady, his professional training keeping him on track even as his attention divided between the song and whatever was happening below. Then he saw her. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was collapsing into the arms of the people around her. Her body went limp, her head falling backward in a way that made Michael's stomach drop. The people near her were panicking, trying to hold her up, waving frantically at a security team that was still several rows away. The massive crowd made it nearly impossible for help to reach her quickly. Michael watched as she slipped through grasping hands, beginning to fall to the ground where she could easily be trampled by the tightly packed audience. Something inside Michael shifted. The professional performer, the carefully managed celebrity, the man who had been trained to never break character during a show, all of that disappeared in an instant. What remained was simply a human being watching another human being in danger. He didn't think about the implications or consult with his team or worry about protocol. He just acted. His voice cut off mid-note, and with a swift motion that surprised even his own band, Michael jumped off the stage. The crowd gasped collectively. Security guards rushed forward, confusion written across their faces. The music stuttered and stopped as the band realized what was happening. Patricia's voice crackled urgently through the earpieces of everyone on staff, demanding to know what was going on. The massive screens behind the stage, which had been displaying carefully choreographed graphics, now showed confused camera operators trying to figure out where to point their lenses. In the span of 5 seconds, a meticulously planned production worth millions of dollars had descended into complete chaos. Michael landed hard on the barrier separating the stage from the audience, then vaulted over it with surprising agility. He pushed through the stunned fans, his larger-than-life stage presence replaced by focused urgency. People stumbled backward in shock, unable to process that their idol was suddenly among them, not performing but responding to an emergency. Michael reached a young woman just as she was going down completely. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her torso as he lowered her gently to the ground rather than letting her crash onto the concrete floor. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale beneath the pulsing stage lights. Michael knelt beside her, his hand instinctively checking for a pulse at her neck. His mother had made him take a first aid course years ago, insisting that everyone should know basic emergency response. He had grumbled about it then, viewing it as just another obligation in his already packed schedule. Now, as his fingers found a weak but steady pulse, he silently thanked her. The young woman was breathing, but shallowly, and she wasn't responsive to his voice. Security finally reached them, forming a protective circle around Michael and the collapsed fan. One of them spoke rapidly into his radio, calling for medical assistance. The crowd had gone eerily quiet, thousands of people straining to see what was happening, worried expressions replacing excited smiles. Michael looked up at his head of security, Marcus, a former paramedic who had been with him for 10 years. Marcus immediately understood, dropping to his knees opposite Michael and beginning a quick assessment. Heat to exhaustion, maybe dehydration, Marcus said quietly, his experienced eyes taking in her symptoms. She needs medical attention fast, but she's stable for now. He looked at Michael with an expression that was part admiration, part concern. They both knew jumping into the crowd had been incredibly risky, not just for Michael's safety but for everyone packed around them. Yet neither of them would have made a different choice. Michael stayed by her side, his hand holding Hayes, his voice speaking softly to her even though she couldn't hear him. He told her she was going to be okay, that help was coming, that she was safe now. The cameras had found them by now, and his image was displayed on every screen in the stadium. Not the polished performer, but a man covered in sweat, kneeling on the ground, holding a stranger's hand. The moment was being captured by thousands of phones, live-streamed across social media, documented in real time by everyone present. Patricia appeared at the edge of the security circle, her face a mask of professional concern overlaying genuine worry. She was already thinking about crisis management, about how to spin the situation, about the liability issues and insurance complications. But when she saw the look on Michael's face, the absolute refusal to move until he knew this young woman was safe, she stopped talking and simply nodded. Some things were more important than public relations strategies. The stadium medical team arrived with a stretcher and proper equipment. They worked quickly and efficiently, checking her vitals, starting in full line, preparing her for transport to the hospital. Michael stayed out of their way but remained close, refusing to return to the stage until he knew she would be all right. The lead medic, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, gave him a reassuring look. They would take good care of her. She would recover. Michael exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. As they lifted the stretcher and began moving through the crowd toward the waiting ambulance, Michael finally stood. His knees were scraped from the concrete, his designer stage clothes torn and dirty. He looked nothing like the polished superstar who had taken the stage an hour ago. He looked better, real, human, present. The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous ovation that was different from before. This wasn't applause for entertainment. It was recognition of something deeper, a moment where someone had chosen human compassion over everything else. Michael walked back toward the stage, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying those critical seconds over and over. Security helped him climb back up, and he stood there for a moment, facing 70,000 people who were no longer just fans, but witnesses to something none of them would ever forget. The applause continued, mixed with cheers of support and admiration. Michael raised a hand, and the crowd gradually quieted. He walked to the microphone, his voice rough with emotion when he finally spoke. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, and the question extended beyond the young woman who had collapsed. He was asking about all of them, the people who had been standing for hours in the heat, the fans who had saved every penny to buy tickets, the ones who had traveled from different states or even different countries to be here tonight. "I need you all to look around. Check on the person next to you. If anyone feels dizzy, if anyone needs help, you wave at security right now. Don't wait. Your safety is more important than any concert." The crowd murmured, and people actually began checking on their neighbors. Security teams throughout the venue went on high alert, scanning for anyone else who might be in distress. Water bottles were passed through the crowd more actively. People made space for others to sit down if they needed to. In that moment, Michael had transformed the concert from entertainment into a community, reminding everyone that they were all in this together, that looking out for each other mattered more than any performance. Michael's management team was in full crisis mode backstage. Phone calls were being made to lawyers, to insurance companies, to public relations specialists. The risk assessment alone for what Michael had just done was staggering. What if he had been injured? What if the crowd had panicked? What if the situation had escalated instead of resolving? Patricia was fielding calls from the label executives who were watching the live stream, some praising Michael's humanity while others worried about the precedent this set for future shows. But Michael wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about a young woman he didn't know, hoping she would be okay. He signaled to his band that he was ready to continue. The musicians looked at him with newfound respect, their expression saying what words couldn't. They launched into the next song, but Michael paused before singing. "This one's for you," he said, looking in the direction where the ambulance had taken the fan. "Get well soon." Then he began to sing, and his voice carried an emotional depth that went beyond technique or training. He was singing with his whole heart, processing the fear and relief of the last 15 minutes through the only language he knew best, music. The concert continued, but it was different now. The atmosphere had shifted from spectacular entertainment to something more intimate and real. Michael's performance became less about hitting choreographed marks and more about connecting with every person in that stadium. He spoke more between songs, sharing stories he had never told before, being vulnerable in ways his carefully constructed public image usually didn't allow. He talked about his own moments of crisis, times when he had felt overwhelmed and ready to collapse under pressure, and how someone's kindness had saved him. Behind the scenes, news of what had happened was spreading like wildfire across social media. Videos of Michael jumping into the crowd were being shared millions of times. News outlets were picking up the story. Commentators were praising his quick response, and the hashtag #MichaelCares was trending worldwide within 20 minutes. But the most powerful responses were coming from ordinary people sharing their own stories of times when someone had stopped to help them, had chosen compassion over convenience, had seen them as human beings deserving of care. One video in particular was going viral, shot from a fan's phone. It showed Michael kneeling beside the collapsed woman, holding her hand, his famous face showing genuine concern rather than performing for cameras. The authenticity of the moment was what made it powerful. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a calculated move to improve his image. It was simply a decent human being doing what anyone should do when someone needs help. The contrast with other celebrities who might have ignored such a situation or delegated it entirely to staff was not lost on viewers. The young woman, whose name was Sarah Martinez, regained consciousness in the ambulance. The first thing she asked the paramedic was whether she had ruined the concert. The paramedic smiled and showed her his phone, where a video of Michael refusing to leave her side was playing. Sarah burst into tears, overwhelmed by what had happened. She had been a fan of Michael's music since she was 13 years old. His songs had gotten her through her parents' divorce, through high school bullying, through the death of her grandmother. She had saved for 2 years to afford front-row tickets to this concert. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined she would meet him, let alone in these circumstances. Back at the stadium, Michael was nearing the end of his set. He had performed for almost 3 hours, far longer than originally planned, as if he was trying to make up for the interruption. But nobody in that audience felt they had missed out on anything. If anything, they had witnessed something more valuable than a perfect concert. They had seen an example of what it means to prioritize human welfare over everything else. The energy in the stadium was different from any concert Michael had ever performed. It was less about worship of a celebrity and more about shared humanity, a collective understanding that we're all vulnerable and we all need each other sometimes. As Michael sang his final song, his phone, which he had left backstage, was lighting up with messages. His social media team reported that his follower count was skyrocketing, but more importantly, the quality of comment had changed. People weren't just posting about how talented he was or how much they loved his music. They were sharing how his actions had inspired them to be better people, to pay more attention to those around them, to choose compassion when given the choice between helping and looking away. Some shared that they had donated to medical charities or volunteered to take first aid courses, motivated by what they had witnessed. The concert ended with Michael standing center stage, exhausted but fulfilled in a way that had nothing to do with musical performance. He thanked the crowd, reminded them again to look out for each other, and promised to visit Sarah at the hospital the next morning. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to last forever. As Michael walked off stage, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to the hospital liaison, asking for updates on Sarah's condition. The response came quickly. She was stable, fully conscious, and expected to make a complete recovery. Michael closed his eyes and leaned against the wall, relief washing over him. Only then did he allow himself to fully feel the weight of what had happened, the fear of those moments when he hadn't known if she would be okay. Patricia found him there, and for once, she didn't talk about logistics or damage control. She just put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did good." Michael nodded, too emotional to speak. He hadn't done anything special, he thought. He had just done what anyone should do. But as he would soon discover, that simple act of human decency was about to change everything in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the gentle hum of the ventilation system. Michael sat in a chair beside Sarah's bed, still wearing the torn and dirty clothes from the concert. His security team waited outside, giving him privacy for this visit that he had insisted on making despite everyone's advice to get some sleep first. It was 3 a.m, and exhaustion lined his face, but he couldn't rest until he saw with his own eyes that she was okay. Sarah was awake but groggy, the full fluids and rest having restored much of her color. When she first saw Michael sitting there, she thought she was dreaming or hallucinating. He smiled at her confusion and gently explained that he had promised to check on her. They talked for nearly an hour, a conversation that started awkward but quickly became comfortable. Sarah told him about her life. She was a graduate student studying social work, passionate about helping at-risk youth. She had grown up in poverty herself and wanted to give back to communities like the one that raised her. Michael listened, really listened, and found himself moved by her dedication and strength. He learned that Sarah had skipped meals that day to save money, had stood in the heat for hours before the concert started, and had been too caught up in the excitement to notice the warning signs her body was giving her. She was embarrassed about the whole incident, worried that she had ruined the show for everyone. Michael shook his head firmly. "You didn't ruin anything," he told her. "You reminded everyone, including me, what actually matters. The show was better because of what happened, not despite it." He meant every word. That concert had become the most meaningful performance of his career, not because of the production value of his vocal performance, but because it had been real and human and honest. Before he left, Michael did something that surprised even his own security team. He asked Sarah about her graduate school expenses and her work with youth programs. When she told him about the constant struggle to fund her education while volunteering at a local community center, he made a decision on the spot. He would cover her tuition for the remainder of her program and provide a grant to the community center where she volunteered. Sarah tried to protest, overwhelmed by the generosity, but Michael was insistent. He told her that his mother had been like her once, struggling to better herself while helping others, and that someone had given his mother a chance that changed everything for their family. This was his way of paying that forward. News of Michael's hospital visit and his financial support for Sarah spread quickly, adding another layer to a story that was already capturing global attention. But the narrative was becoming bigger than just one celebrity helping one fan. It was sparking a broader conversation about compassion, about the responsibility that comes with influence and wealth, about how we treat each other in moments of crisis. Think pieces were being written. Podcast hosts were discussing it, and morning show producers were scrambling to book interviews with anyone connected to the story. Michael returned to his hotel as dawn was breaking over Chicago. He finally allowed himself to collapse onto the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind was racing with thoughts about the trajectory his life had taken, about success and purpose and meaning. He had achieved everything he had once dreamed of: fame, fortune, respect from his musical peers. But last night had shown him something he hadn't fully grasped before. His platform could be used for more than entertainment. It could be a force for encouraging kindness and human connection in a world that desperately needed both. By mid-morning, Michael's phone was buzzing constantly with interview requests, but he had instructed his team to decline most of them. He didn't want to turn this into a publicity tour. However, he did agree to one interview with a local Chicago journalist he respected, someone who had covered his early career and understood the context of his roots. The interview took place in a small cafe in the neighborhood where Michael had grown up, away from the glitz of his usual surroundings. The journalist, a weathered man named Tom Reeves, asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Why did you jump off that stage? You could have let security handle it. You could have kept performing. What made you stop everything?" Michael thought carefully before answering. He talked about his mother, about growing up watching her struggle to make ends meet, about the time strangers had helped his family when they needed it most. He talked about how success and fame can create distance between you and regular human experiences, how easy it becomes to forget that every person in a crowd is someone's son or daughter, someone who matters profoundly to the people who love them. "I saw someone who needed help," Michael said simply. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Not the show, not my reputation, not the money invested in production. Just a person who needed someone to care. How could I have done anything else? His words were unscripted and honest, lacking the polished quality of typical celebrity interviews. Tom recorded everything, recognizing that he was capturing something authentic that readers would respond to viscerally. The interview was published that afternoon and immediately went viral. Michael's words resonated because they challenged a celebrity culture that often prioritizes image over substance, performance over humanity. Social media lit up with people sharing their own experiences of being helped by strangers or times when they had stopped to assist someone in need. The hashtag #HashEachOther began trending alongside #MichaelKs, representing a movement toward greater awareness of the people around us. But not everyone responded positively. Some critics accused Michael of staging the entire incident for publicity, claiming it was too perfectly timed and too conveniently captured on video. Conspiracy theories spread on certain corners of the internet, suggesting that Sarah had been a plant, that the collapse had been orchestrated for media attention. These accusations hurt Michael deeply, not because they attacked his reputation, but because they suggested such cynicism about human kindness that people couldn't believe someone would simply help another person without ulterior motives. Sarah herself addressed these conspiracy theories in a statement released through the hospital. She provided medical records documenting her heat exhaustion and dehydration, verified by independent physicians. She spoke passionately about how hurtful it was to have a real medical emergency turned into fodder for conspiracy theories, and she defended Michael's character forcefully. Her statement was articulate and moving, and it silenced most of the skeptics. Those who continued to insist it was staged were largely dismissed as contrarians looking for attention. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening across the country. People began sharing stories of attending concerts where fans had collapsed or become ill, and how those situations were typically handled. The contrast was stark. Most venues had medical staff on hand, but performers rarely interrupted their shows for individual emergencies. The standard protocol was for security and medical teams to handle things discreetly while the performance continued. Michael's decision to stop everything and personally intervene was unusual precisely because it deviated from the norm. This realization sparked a larger conversation about how we've normalized putting entertainment ahead of human welfare, about the structures that encourage performers to stay detached from their audiences, about the ways fame creates barriers between people. Music industry professionals began discussing whether protocols should change, whether artists should be more involved when fans need help, whether the show really must go on in every circumstance. Michael had inadvertently started a cultural conversation that extended far beyond one incident at one concert. His fellow musicians began speaking out, with many expressing support for what he had done. Some shared their own stories of moments when they had noticed fans in distress, but felt constrained by professional expectations to keep performing. Others admitted they had simply been oblivious, so focused on their own performance that they didn't register what was happening in the audience. A few brave voices acknowledged that the celebrity bubble can make you forget that the people watching you are real individuals with real lives, reducing them to a faceless mass providing adulation. As the week progressed, Michael watched this ripple effect with a mixture of pride and discomfort. He hadn't jumped off that stage to start a movement or make a statement. He had simply reacted to someone in need. But he was learning that sometimes individual actions can catalyze broader change, that moment of authentic humanity can pierce through the cynicism and apathy that often characterize modern culture. Whether he wanted it or not, he had become a symbol of something larger than himself, representing the possibility that success and compassion could coexist, that fame didn't require losing your humanity. 3 months after the concert, Michael stood in the same Chicago stadium, but everything felt different. This wasn't a performance. It was a community event he had organized called See Each Other, a day of connection and care. The stadium that once held 70,000 concertgoers now hosted thousands of people participating in free health screenings, first aid training workshops, mental health resources, and community-building activities. Medical professionals volunteered their time, providing checkups and education. Local organizations set up booths to connect people with support services. And at the center of it all was Sarah, now fully recovered and working as the event's coordinator. The transformation in Michael's life had been profound. The incident at the concert had forced him to reevaluate everything: his career priorities, how he used his platform, what he wanted his legacy to be. He continued making music and performing, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Every concert now included mandatory wellness checks for attendees, with medical staff strategically positioned throughout venues and clear protocols for stopping shows if anyone needed help. Other artists have begun adopting similar policies, creating an industry-wide shift in how performer and audience relationships were understood. Michael had also established the See Each Other Foundation, funded initially by his own donation but quickly growing through contributions from fans and fellow artists. The foundation provided grants to graduate students like Sarah who were dedicating their lives to social work and community service. It funded first aid training programs in underserved communities. It supported initiatives that brought people together across social and economic divides. Sarah served on the board, bringing her perspective and passion to the foundation's mission. The cynicism that had initially greeted Michael's actions had largely faded, replaced by something more hopeful. People began recognizing that authentic compassion was possible, even in a world that often seemed increasingly self-centered and divided. The story of what happened at that concert was now taught in some business schools as an example of values-driven leadership, in medical schools as an illustration of bystander intervention, and in communication classes as a case study in authentic human connection cutting through media noise. Michael's relationship with his fans had evolved as well. The distance that typically exists between celebrity and audience had diminished. He read their letters more carefully now, paid attention to their stories, recognized them as individuals rather than a collective mass. He had started doing smaller, more intimate performances at community centers and local venues, returning to the roots of why he fell in love with music in the first place. These shows didn't make headlines or earn millions of dollars, but they filled him with satisfaction that his stadium tours never had. Sarah had become a close friend, their bond forged in those intense moments and strengthened by shared values. She had completed her graduate program with Michael's support and was now working at a non-profit organization that served at-risk youth, doing exactly what she had always dreamed of doing. She often joked that collapsing at a concert was the best thing that ever happened to her, though she was quick to clarify that she didn't recommend it as a life strategy. Michael appreciated her humor and her groundedness, the way she never let him take himself too seriously. On this particular day, as Michael watched hundreds of people moving through the stadium participating in various activities, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. His mother would have loved seeing this, he thought. She had always believed that success was meaningless if you didn't use it to lift others up. He touched the silver bracelet on his wrist, the one she had given him, and felt her presence guiding him as it always had. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, approached Michael shyly. He asked for an autograph, and Michael obliged, but then took a moment to talk with him. He learned the boy loved music and was learning to play guitar. Michael asked about his dreams, listened to his excited answers about wanting to be a musician someday. Before the boy left, Michael told him something important. When you make it big, and you will if you work hard and stay true to yourself, remember that your success is a gift. Use it to help others. Stay connected to real people and real struggles. Don't let fame make you forget what matters. The boy nodded seriously, as if understanding the weight of those words even at his young age. Michael watched him rejoin his family, and he felt hopeful about the future. Maybe this new generation would build a better celebrity culture, one where fame and compassion weren't treated as opposing forces. Maybe the values of connection and care will become as important as talent and ambition. It was a possibility worth working toward. As the sun began to set over Chicago, Michael took the stage one more time. Not to perform, but to speak. He thanked everyone who had come, everyone who had volunteered, everyone who had contributed to making this day possible. He talked about the journey that had led to this moment, acknowledging that it started with fear and instinct but had evolved into something purposeful and meaningful. He spoke about Sarah and how her courage and dedication inspired him. He challenged everyone present to carry the spirit of this day forward into their daily lives, to see each other not as strangers or obstacles, but as fellow human beings deserving of care and respect. The crowd applauded, but it wasn't the same wild applause as at a concert. It was warmer, more intimate, filled with genuine appreciation rather than fan worship. Michael looked out at all those faces and realized this was what he had been searching for all along, not fame or fortune or validation, but purpose. His music had given him a platform, but moments like the one at the concert 3 months ago had shown him what to do with that platform. Patricia, his manager, stood in the wings watching. She had been skeptical at first when Michael announced he wanted to scale back his touring schedule to focus more on community work and the foundation. She had worried about the financial implications and the risk of his career losing momentum. But watching him now, seeing the genuine joy and fulfillment on his face, she understood. Some things were more important than maintaining peak commercial success. Sometimes growth meant changing direction entirely. As the event concluded and people began filtering out of the stadium, Michael stayed behind. He walked through the empty space, remembering the night that had changed everything. The spot where Sarah had collapsed was just ordinary floor now, but to him it would always be significant. The place where he had made a choice that revealed who he truly wanted to be. He had jumped off that stage without thinking, driven by pure instinct to help someone in need. That single moment had redirected the entire course of his life and career. In the weeks and months that followed this community event, the ripples continued spreading. Other celebrities began organizing similar initiatives in their communities. The foundation Michael had started inspired other philanthropic efforts focused on connection and care rather than just financial donations. The cultural conversation around fame, success, and social responsibility continued evolving. Michael's story became a reference point for discussions about what it means to use privilege and platform responsibly. But for Michael himself, the most profound change was internal. He had discovered that the moments he felt most alive weren't when he was performing to packed stadiums or winning awards or topping charts. There were moments like sitting in Sarah's hospital room, or teaching that young boy about using success to help others, or seeing community members support each other at the Foundation's events. These were the moments that made him feel truly successful, not as a celebrity but as a human being. He continued making music because he loved it, and because his songs still meant something to people. But now his art was informed by a deeper understanding of human vulnerability and connection. His lyrics became more honest, more grounded in real experience rather than the abstract emotions of typical pop songs. Critics noted the evolution in his work, some praising it as his most mature and meaningful music yet, others missing the more commercial sound of his earlier hits. Michael didn't mind the mixed reviews. He was no longer making music to please everyone or maintain chart dominance. He was making music that reflected who he had become. Years later, when interviewers would ask Michael about the defining moment of his career, he never hesitated. It wasn't the first platinum record or the sold-out world tour or any of the accolades that had once seemed so important. It was a night a fan collapsed at his concert, and he jumped off the stage without thinking, choosing human connection over performance, compassion over calculation. That single decision, made in a split second without contemplating consequences, had taught him more about success and meaning than all the years of carefully managed celebrity that came before it. Sarah remained involved with the foundation, eventually becoming its director and expanding its reach far beyond what Michael had initially envisioned. She brought her expertise in social work and her understanding of community needs to create programs that genuinely help people. The foundation became known not just for its financial support, but for its innovative approaches to building connection in an increasingly isolated society. Michael credited Sarah with transforming his initial instinct to help into something systematic and sustainable. On the anniversary of that fateful concert, Michael and Sarah returned to the stadium together. They stood where she had collapsed and where he had knelt beside her, and they reflected on everything that had changed since that night. Sarah thanked him again. Though Michael insisted the gratitude should go both ways, she had reminded him of his humanity at a moment when he most needed that reminder. They had both saved each other in different ways, and from that mutual rescue had grown something beautiful and lasting. The stadium was quiet now, empty of the crowds that had witnessed their first meeting. But the impact of that night continued echoing through countless lives touched by their foundation, through the artists who had changed how they approached their relationship with audiences, through the ordinary people who had been inspired to stop and help someone in need rather than looking away. One moment of authentic compassion had proven powerful enough to shift culture. One decision to prioritize human welfare over performance had demonstrated that fame and humanity could not only coexist but could amplify each other. As Michael and Sarah walked out of the stadium together, they talked about the future. New programs the foundation would launch, communities they hoped to serve, ways they could deepen their impact. But they also talk about simpler things: Sarah's upcoming wedding, Michael's new album exploring themes of connection and vulnerability, the small everyday moment of kindness they had witnessed that week. The conversation flowed easily between grand vision and humble gratitude, between ambition and contentment. Michael's career continued thriving, but success now meant something different to him. It wasn't measured in ticket sales or streaming numbers, though those remained healthy. It was measured in the letters from people who said his actions had inspired them to be more compassionate, in the communities brought together through his foundation's work, in the young musicians he mentored who understood that talent was only valuable when paired with character. His legacy was being built not just through his music, but through the values he embodied and the movement he had sparked. The world had watched a famous musician jump off a stage to help a collapsing fan, and in that moment, they had seen something they desperately needed to see: proof that compassion still existed, that success hadn't killed kindness, that celebrity status didn't require abandoning basic human decency. Michael had shocked the world not by doing something extraordinary, but by doing something fundamentally ordinary, seeing someone who needed help and choosing to provide it. In a culture that had become cynical about the motivations of public figures, his authentic response had pierced through the noise and touched something deep in the collective consciousness. The story of that night will be told and retold for years to come, sometimes embellished, sometimes simplified, but always centered on the same truth. A man chose humanity over performance, and in doing so, reminded millions of others that they could make similar choices in their own lives. The concert might have been interrupted, the carefully planned show thrown into chaos, the production derailed, but something far more valuable had been created in its place. A moment of real connection, of genuine care, of compassion without calculation. And from that single moment had grown a movement, a foundation, a friendship, and a transformation that would continue rippling outward for decades to come, touching lives in ways Michael could never fully quantify but could certainly feel. Standing in that empty stadium on the anniversary of the night that changed everything, Michael understood with perfect clarity that jumping off that stage had been the most important performance of his entire career, not because anyone was watching, but because someone desperately needed help, and he had been there to provide it. That was the real definition of success, the true measure of a life well lived, and the legacy that would matter long after the music faded.